The Dawgs whooped up on the Clemson Tigers. They did it in Atlanta, and it was a neutral site game, but you can take visits to neutral site games, and we saw quite the visitor list. Steve, you already caught up with several of these guys. What are you hearing coming out of this one?
Chad Simmons and I both crushing the phone lines, talking to top prospects that visited for Georgia today, talking to guys that are committed, top prospects that are there. The buzz remains the same. Georgia is the program to beat for five-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin and Justice Terry, the number 1 and number 2 players in the country at the position, top 10 prospects overall. We like where Georgia's one of the front runners for the number 1 linebacker in the country, Tyler Atkinson. You know, he's talked about how he goes, the Dogs know how to fight. He talked about Coach Schumann and how he runs the defense and how the linebackers play. And he feels close to guys on the team, KJ Bolden, Jalen Walker, Michael Williams. Georgia had 447 yards of offense. Clemson had just 188. So it was a bloodbath.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1 tight end in the country in 2027, Mark Bowman. A lot of buzz behind the scenes that he's a special prospect. He loves the way Georgia uses their tight ends. LaDamian Guyton's our number 1 player in the country in 2027. He said, he goes, it opened my eyes, the difference between the SEC and the ACC, the physicality and speed and talent. So what separates Georgia from other programs. He was hanging out with his teammate Elijah Griffin. The commits loved it. They can't wait to be out there next year. Guys like Cortez Smith and Landon Rowland and then Tay Harris. He's a Clemson commit, defensive back, having a great senior year. He was in the Clemson section. He said it was a great win for Georgia. Still go Tigers, but great win. Georgia's continuing to recruit him. Obviously, they made a great impression on a lot of younger players. Georgia's got a chance to finish with the number 1 class in 2025. It starts with those 2 defensive linemen. This showing, just a reminder, because it's been a while since we've seen Georgia dismantle Florida State to end last season in a bowl game that they didn't really want to play in. It's college football playoff or bust for the Bulldogs. This was a reminder of just what they're capable of. And Clemson was never able to really get anything going offensively. And then once the second half, after Georgia made some adjustments, Clemson couldn't really stop them.
Yeah, and Steve, I kind of felt like Clemson needed this. I mean, they needed something. I don't know if they needed a win here. Obviously they did, but I felt like their recruiting has kind of slid a little bit, and it doesn't have that shine on it like it used to. And it just seemed like it's going to be tough for Dabo to pull out of this and really recruit a top 10 class at this point.
Well, we're just not seeing the same caliber of guys that we were used to seeing at Clemson when they were competing for national championships. Brian Brzee, Miles Murphy were kind of the latest, and Nate Wiggins, but you're talking about guys like Isaiah Simmons and AJ Terrell, certainly the quarterbacks, Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson and some of those great defensive linemen, Cleveland Farrell, Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, those special players, Shaq Lawson. They had some great players when they were competing for national championships. Vic Beasley.
Great quarterbacks to go with it. Seems like that's kind of run out too.
The receivers were just fantastic. T. Higgins and players like that, and Sammy Watkins, and they just don't have that same kind of talent level right now. I mean, yeah, there's a Barrett Carter out there running around who's as good as anybody, but they're just not, they got a lot of good players, but when they were competing for the national championship, making the college football playoff, they had some of the best players in college football. And that's what they were looking at on the other sideline. They're not recruiting those players right now.
Yeah. And there we see him at number 14. Steve there.
They'll have a good year. Their culture's great. They'll play hard every week. They were 4-4 last year and won their last 5 regular season games. They're going to maximize what they have on their roster. But when they get into a game like this against a Georgia or a top-level opponent, they don't have the elite players that they used to have that I just rattled off.
Right. Yeah. They got them sprinkled in. You get a Peter Woods, but you don't have a whole defensive line made up of that caliber player, and that's what we're seeing at Georgia. So Georgia, like you said, there were some really impressive 26 and 27 recruits there. This is kind of, when we look at the top of this list, like Justice Terry and Elijah Griffin, I mean, they were coming to these Georgia games as freshmen and sophomore. And that's why when we head into this 2025 cycle, Justice Terry and Elijah Griffin were already leaning toward Georgia. So games like this at a neutral site with all the excitement around it, I mean, I got to imagine that's a really impressive atmosphere for a 26 or 27 recruit.
I mean, I don't know if it's just Mercedes-Benz Stadium or the difference between ESPN, ABC, and some of the other stations I was watching, but my surround sound, and that's not a brag, I'm just trying to paint a picture. My surround sound, the Georgia Clemson game was much louder than Penn State, West Virginia, and some of the other games I was cycling through. And it was a very pro Georgia crowd. Not that, I mean, Clemson fans didn't have much to cheer about in that game. They had one extended drive. They made some plays defensively, but it sounded very loud. There were over 70,000 people there. Most of them seemed like Georgia fans. It felt like it was a game between the hedges. Georgia capitalized. They're going to get these guys on campus a bunch during the season as well.